Okay, and welcome back to my after-action report of my combat mission Fortress Italy, played by email game against Bletchley Geek. Now, if you saw the mission briefing, then you will have seen how I set up my defense. As you can see, I have completed my METT-TC analysis. I understand what mission I have. I understand the time I have to do the mission. I've considered the terrain and I've set up my defenses accordingly. But there is one critical piece of information that I do not have. Do you know what it is? The enemy. Where is the enemy and what are they going to do? As I've explained previously, looking at the enemy side of the map, I identified two major approach routes, one of whom comes through this orchard right here and onto objective Casa Finella, with the secondary capability of advancing through it onto Casa Riposa. So that is one approach route coming down through this area right here that the enemy could use. There is a second approach route over here on this side of the map, also covered by orchard or light trees or whatever these are. You can advance through this orchard, through the woods, onto Casa d'Antonio, or you can use this defilade area to advance in either direction. So the question now arises, I know all the factors of my METT-TC analysis except for what the enemy is doing. And as part of my planning, I had already figured out exactly what I'm going to do about that. I'd like to introduce you to someone. Meet Bedard and his +2 leadership, +2 motivation, elite scout team. His job is going to be to get out there and find out where the enemy is and what they are doing. Of course, it is night, and the visibility in any direction is very limited. But generally speaking, what I want to do is make sure if the enemy is using this approach route over here, or if the enemy is using this approach route over here. So what he's going to do is he is going to take off on a nice little jaunt, heading across country up through this orchard, up this road to the crossroads, and then he's going to come down this road back here. Basically, he's just going to head out, he's going to walk around, and he's just going to wait until he bumps into somebody. And hopefully that will tell me whether the enemy is concentrating on this side of the map over here, or whether they're concentrating on this near side of the map over here. So without further ado, we're going to watch Bedard and his team take on that mission, and afterwards, when we find out what he's seen, we'll come back and we'll do some analysis. Now, as you can see, what I'm doing with Bedard here is I'm using extremely short hunt moves that are followed up with very long pauses, just so he can kind of sit here, he can observe the area around him, and see if he can spot anyone. You can see I have his entire course mapped out, including face commands that allow him to stop and observe in a certain direction for up to an entire minute. And it eventually ends all the way back at the battalion HQ. But as you might be aware, it takes a full 7 seconds, I think 7 to 9 seconds, to do a complete 360-degree spotting check from your position, and then of course the longer you remain in position, the more spotting checks get completed before you move again. And the idea behind this type of movement is that every time he reaches a new point, he stops, he completes multiple spotting checks around each area, facing in the direction of the most probable enemy contact, and then after that, he moves on.
Ausschau halten.
Now, as you can see, I initially changed my mind when plotting the orders. As you saw last turn, every single one of these pause commands was about a minute long. I decided that when I finally actually calculated exactly how long it would take to complete this entire route, the result was almost an hour. So I decided to cut down the pause commands, but other than that, I didn't change the route any. Now, the more knowledgeable or eagle-eyed observers out there might be screaming at me that I've made a mistake, but I'm going to let things play out, and then we'll talk about that afterwards.
Beobachten. Seid aufmerksam.
Okay. So now that that is over, someone out there could probably saying, I knew that would happen. Well, of course you did. So what mistake did I actually make in moving my scout team across this orchard? The answer is, I attempted to traverse this entire orchard with a single move order without consideration towards stopping and looking around, and I also failed to take advantage of an actual good piece of hard cover right up here next to the orchard that I could have used to advance across it. Basically, my analysis of my own movement did not actually expect to meet the enemy, and that was my biggest mistake. However, we have met the enemy, and going back over the footage, one can see about 2 infantry squads at least here. There were 2 more contact markers here and 2 more contact markers here. So, if I treat each contact marker as a full squad, we're looking at least an entire infantry platoon moving down this road over here. So, this little scouting expedition, as short-lived as it was, did generate some useful intelligence, namely that the enemy is moving down this avenue of approach. Whether it is the enemy's main attack, or whether this is merely a diversionary attack, is yet to be known, precisely because of that mistake I made with my scout team that ended up getting them killed before they could generate any more useful intelligence. For example, if I had moved them up behind this little crook in the stone wall here and just had them sit here and observe for a while, having used the wall to move up into position while still behind some cover, they probably could have made contact with at least a few more units, and I would at least have a better idea of their composition and strength. But regardless of how mismanaged that move was, I did immediately make one assumption, and that is, the enemy is moving down this approach route towards Casafanella in strength. Now, the question is that assumption accurate or not? And for that, what we're going to do is break the narrative, and we're going to take a look at the enemy turn and see exactly what he has moving down this approach route. Well, the squad leader's mag dump notwithstanding, this is the element that I made contact with my scout team, and as you might recall, my assumption about enemy force that I bumped into was approximately a platoon, and as you might notice, this is an infantry platoon. So one thing we can say is that my initial assumption was correct. The enemy was at least in platoon strength, advancing down this avenue of approach. Now, I'm not going to show you the rest of the enemy forces because I'm not going to put in spoilers. You're going to have to tune in for at least some other parts. But one thing that might strike you, looking at this squad in particular... Actually, well, maybe not. They are regulars. But there is one thing that will be a fixture of this battle, is that my force, being hand-picked and hand-molded per se in the forces editor, will have a slight qualitative advantage over Bletchley Geek's own Canadian forces, especially in experience. Because in my mind, poorly motivated veterans are better fighters than normal motivated regulars or even highly motivated green troops. But that'll be for the end of it. So, this opening section of the battle, me sending out my scout team to generate some intelligence did generate a little bit of intelligence. We spotted an enemy platoon advancing down the approach route, and they're most likely heading down here, and they will be blundering into my wire in front of Casa Finella at some point in the future. But during the course of this battle, that actually took quite a long time because Bletchley Geek has a relatively large force that he needs to transport across the map. So we're going to have to skip ahead a few turns at least to get that done. But one other key factor in this small little engagement here is what effect it had on the enemy player. Because one thing you have to remember when playing combat mission against another human opponent, as opposed to playing it in single player, is you're not fighting the pixel troopin that are available to the other team. You're not fighting an AI that's simply been programmed to act and react in certain ways. You're fighting against an enemy person. Alright? And it is the mind of the enemy commander that you are fighting against. So one thing that would be nice is if Bletchley Geek could sound off, either here or on the forums. What effect did this initial skirmish have? Did it put him slightly off balance? Did it make him concerned about what my potential actions might have been? Did he take actions that might have otherwise disrupted his normal plan? To be honest, only Bletchley Geek himself can answer that, and if he does, I will feature his comment in the next video. But for now, we're going to leave things off here. I will pick things up again when main contact is made against my defensive positions around Casa Finella. Until then, I hope you all have a fantastic day. Okay, bye.